Hey there, and welcome back to Natural Pairing, the podcast where we celebrate natural wine and the stories behind what's in our glass. I'm Christine.
I'm Daisy.
And today we're diving into some of the most fun, quirky, and history-soaked Spanish wine traditions. First, we're talking about wine pouring and serving. But not just any pouring. We're going to Spain and the Basque Country to explore some legendary serving styles that make drinking wine a full-on experience. Get ready to meet the Porron, the Txakoli high pour, the Venencia, and the bold tradition of Sabering. Yes, we're talking about Sabering Cava.
And then we'll head into the streets and get into the festivals, where entire towns celebrate wine with parades, parties, and even full-on wine fights in the streets. We're talking Rioja, Galicia, and the Copa Jerez, where wine and food go head-to-head.
So let's pour into it.
Ooh, okay.
So let's start in Catalonia, Spain, with the Porron. So picture this, a glass vessel with a long, thin pour spout. So the idea with the Porron is to pour wine directly into your mouth from as high as you can dare, without touching the glass to your lips. It's part skill, part dare. It's 100% a crowd pleaser. I remember when I was touring around Ribera del Duero, and this is where I saw it mostly after the day's events and after meeting winemakers. And we'd go out into some of the local bars and restaurants. And it was so ubiquitous, this porron, that it was almost comical. A porron would be served to the table for your lightly chilled red wine if it was a hot day and you wanted something refreshing. Sometimes it was a little bit stronger wine, but these are wines that are meant to be drunk casually and as more of a cocktail wine. This glass Porron was put on your table and you were meant to really pass it around without a glass, just aiming into your mouth to enjoy this wine.
I've always seen this as a waiter or bartender pouring it for the guests. Like they would go around and essentially pour wine into each guest's mouth. But if it arrives on your table and you're meant to sort of self-serve, I feel like this requires a whole different level of skill and practice.
Oh, and the pressure is on, right? Especially if you're wearing any sort of light color,
yeah.
or if the person you're pouring for is. Both people have to be really in tune with each other to get the pour right and the aim, and it is a skill. And so I would start very close, but the idea with this porron is that historically it was meant to be very hygienic, and so that was why it was created. Was so that you weren't actually sharing a glass or touching your lips to the same glassware. So it is critical that you pour it from high enough where that it's not actually going to touch your mouth.
Yeah, it's almost like the original social distancing wine dispenser.
Absolutely. In COVID, we should have broken this out and really made it a thing. So in the olden days, this was pretty forward thinking for the hygiene component. But today, it really is all about the fun and the finesse of doing it. In Catalonia, you'll often see porrons passed around at these casual gatherings, and especially I would say with more rustic dishes and appetizers like pan con tomate or a plate of charcuterie. It really is meant to kind of be an appetizer setting and a very kind of communal cocktail hour. The higher the pour, the more street cred you earn. So everyone's watching, but also the more wine you accidentally pour all over yourself, I guess you'll lose your cred and the porron is passed quickly.
When you have a glass of wine, you're very aware of how many glasses or how much wine you've consumed. But when it's out of like a communal pitcher, you also don't focus or worry so much about how much wine you're drinking.
You're really kind of throwing caution to the wind here in many respects. You have absolutely no idea how much you're consuming. You don't really know where it's going to land. But I guess that just kind of adds to the thrill of the moment. And again, it's meant for lighter style wines. And we're not talking about white wines. Most of the time when I was there, traditionally it's used for both white and red wines, but I saw it mostly used with reds. So aim and accuracy is critical with the Porron.
So it's all glass, and so you can see the wine in it. You can see how much is in there. And it's sort of a cross between a decanter and a pitcher with a long spout.
Exactly. And the spout is actually, it's surprisingly long, and it's tapered so that at the end, it's not like it's coming out of a water pitcher with a wide mouth.
If you're icing a cake or something, it kind of looks, the end looks like a piping back. It comes to a point, And that's what you sort of pour/shoot into your mouth.
That's exactly it. And there are even competitions to see who can pour from the highest distance without missing. And again, it is harder than it looks, but it's quite fun. So that is the tradition of the Porron.
Okay, what's next?
Another beautiful tradition is actually up north in the Basque region. It's on the northern edge of Spain. They have their own language, and the regional wine is called Txakoli or Txakolina. And this is poured in a very traditional way, and it's the traditional high pour. So in the Basque country, they have their own dramatic pour called the high pour with Txakoli, which is a slightly sparkling or naturally effervescent, really fresh, lighter style white wine that has a really nice kind of refreshing acidity to it. The grape variety for Txakoli is called Handarabi Zuri, which is very fun to say. So the Txakoli is traditionally served from high above the glass in a stream that looks like you've just kind of unlocked some sommelier level skill set, where you're pouring the bottle from a high distance. And it's traditionally served in these flat bottom glasses, and they look like really beautiful water glasses, so that when you pour the Txakoli from high, it hits the bottom of the glass and it activates or aerates the wine and wakes up these tiny bubbles to soften both the acidity but also the carbonation. And what this does is it makes it almost like a creamy, still light, but very creamy, beautiful texture.
I love that. It's not just bar flair, but functionally there's a bit of science. It's sort of aerating the wine and sort of naturally highlighting the fizziness in the way that it's served.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting. So I would say most people in this country probably pour the Txakoli without knowing this tradition into their glass as you would a typical white wine. And so we experience Txakoli with this like slight fizziness to it. But when you're there and you're enjoying it with this bounty of seafood and all of these tapas and pinchos, the wine, it's smooth and it's still crisp, but it's very almost like mouth coating and soft. Mm-hmm. There's like a really pretty softness to it. And that's all from the pour.
When you go to a bar or a wine shop, they start pouring from almost 2 or 3 feet up high in the air, and they don't miss the glass. Like they just tip the bottle, and 2 or 3 feet up in the air, they hit the bottom of the glass just artfully, which I think is super impressive.
And I never saw a waiter or bartender miss, but then I started trying it at home and I had wine all over the floor. But it's definitely worth a try.
But it's not just white wines, although it is typically done with white wine.
They also make rosé versions that are delicious and super refreshing, also slightly sparkling.
It's just that outside of Basque Country, you don't see as much of the non-white Txakolis.
Yeah, and so, some of the rosés are starting to come in, but it's true. The whites are more prevalent here at this point.
Are Txakolis in a different type of bottle?
They are. They're typically in a very tall, slender, tapered bottle, which actually makes it much easier to hold with one hand. If you can imagine a burgundy bottle with a big base, holding that up on high with one hand is quite difficult. But this tall, slender bottle that you'll also see in French regions like Alsace.
Or Rieslings in Austria.
Exactly. Rieslings, that tall, slender bottle actually makes it easier to hold with one hand. And then it does taper to that kind of pour spout. So it does make it slightly easier to hold and aim. Still challenging though. And so you'll see this. So Basque Country, we're talking about some of the more famous cities are San Sebastian. I was lucky enough to go there in the early 2000s. I think it was 2003. Bilbao is another border town that's really popular for tourists. And usually you'll go there and on the bars, all of these appetizers will be displayed family style. So you'll just see platters of octopus and calamari and ceviches and pan con tomate and all of this just kind of layered on the bar, and then you ask for what you want. They'll make you a plate and then pour your Txakoli from on high into your flat bottom glass. You'll take your plate and find a seat.
I first learned about Txakoli from you. when we brought it into our shop in spring of 2021. And we found a really cool organic winery out in Basque Country, Bengoetxe, which is also a fun word to say. And we found one of their Txakolis that they export here to the US. And now it's my spring-summer wine as well as party trick wine.
And it's also kind of rare now to find natural or organic Txakolis because it is such a cocktail wine. It's typically not very expensive. I'd say 30 to 50 years, it had become really commercialized. So finding these gems that are really traditional, still made naturally or organically are amazing. It's just super clean, really fresh.
Cool. What else is on your list?
Okay, so another tradition, also in Spain, is in the region where sherry is made. So we're heading south to Andalusia, the home of sherry. Here you'll meet La Venencia. La Venencia is a long, slender cup on a stick situation that is part tradition and part very practical tool. So in the sherry bodegas, La Venencia is used to sample the sherry, which is a fortified wine, straight from the barrel. The server dips the Venecia into the barrel and lifts it with almost like a flick, and then pours the wine in a graceful arc into the glass. And again, this is from a distance.
When you say that it's a long sort of stick with a cup, it's almost like a yard-long stick. Like this is like a very long, and it's quite flexible. If you were to hold one end of it, the cup is a little bit almost like bouncy. So imagine like a yardstick, but a very flexible one. The cup is not, like if you're holding this thing outwards, the cup is not facing upwards. It's like it's sideways facing you. So you kind of have to bounce and dip it into the barrel at the right sort of bounce and tension without spilling it. And it's like a pour back when they put it into the cup. It's also a high pour. I mean, right off the heels of our last tradition, they have to high pour it into a sample glass for someone to then taste it.
So there's some theater in this, but this method was born out of the need to taste wine quickly without disturbing the protective layer of flor or yeast that keeps certain sherries fresh. But over time, the Venecia became an art form and really a symbol of this mastery. Now, to fully understand this whole process, you have to understand a little bit about sherry and sherry wine, what it is and how it's made. So really quickly, as an aside, sherry, or Jeras in Spanish, is a fortified wine made primarily from the white Palomino grapes in the southern region of Spain. Sherry is famous for a wide range of styles. It can be from bone dry to a sweet and luscious style. What makes sherry really unique is its aging process, which is the use of the Solera system, where younger wines are blended with older wines over time. And some styles like Fino and Manzanilla, these are lighter in flavor, drier, also lighter in color, are aged under a natural layer of yeast, which is called the flor. So as the wine is fermenting, the yeast naturally rises to the top and creates this almost like a crust on top of the wine, and they don't disturb it because this protects the wine from oxygen and gives it a really distinctive salty, kind of slightly nutty flavor, but also preserves the lighter color of the wine. This is where La Venencia is used to poke through the flor and get just a taste of the sherry beneath it to try it while it's fermenting. Other styles like Oloroso or Amontillado, which are darker styles, or even the PX or Pedro Jimenez, which is very dark but also very sweet, those are exposed to oxygen during the aging process. So this creates a rich, deeper, almost caramelized flavors to the sherry. So sherry is incredibly versatile. It can be refreshing as an aperitif. We actually have a really beautiful Fino right now. It's great for cocktails on ice with appetizers. And it's a perfect pairing for salty snacks like olives or almonds. Or you can serve a darker style, some being sweet, some being dry. with appetizers as well, or as a dessert wine. It's such a beautiful process. The Venencia, it's steeped in this tradition. It had so many different uses. It was so long and it was so delicate and small so that it didn't disturb the floor. Then it was used to pour only a small amount into this glass. And the word Venencia is actually thought to come from the word avenencia, meaning agreement, because back in the day, the wine was sampled this way before sealing the deal on a sale. So if they intended to sell the wine and the proprietor was sampling it to the potential buyer, but only wanted to take a small little sip before they purchased it.
Perfect. Then we get into one of my favorite ones, which is the art of sabering.
Yeah, absolutely. Originated in France, but it is one of the coolest traditions. So it's not exactly the process of serving, but this is more about opening a sparkling wine. So this is one of our most favorite and theatrical wine traditions. We're going to talk about savoring Cava, and you've probably seen it, or if you've heard of it, with champagnes. But in Spain, savoring a bottle of Cava is festive and a fearless way to kick off a celebration. And Cava, so it traditionally comes from the Penedès region of Spain. It's typically made with the regional grape varieties, Xarel-lo, Parellada, and Macabeo. And Cava is to Spain as champagne is to France. So very, very highly regarded. And there's a long tradition of aging it and all of these different distinctions for Cava. So it is a really beautiful wine. It's also, you can get quite reasonably priced Cavas. So the tradition dates back to Napoleonic times when the French cavalry officers would savor champagne bottles to show off their bravado. And today the technique is still all about the flair. So how you do it is you slide a saber with the right pressure and angle. The top will actually just fly cleanly off with this really beautiful, satisfying pop. Now, a couple of things to note. Number one, always take the cage off of the cork if there is a cage on top of the cork. If you try this at home, do so with caution and make sure to watch enough YouTube how-to videos so that you feel confident and ready for this, but we can kind of describe it. So you hold the bottle with the cork facing away from you. You're holding the bottle. I would hold it in my left hand because I'm right-handed, so the saber would be in my right hand.
If you think about how the glass bottle is formed, there's actually a seam that runs from the top to the bottom of the bottle, because where that line hits the very top of the bottle, where the lip of the glass on the top is, and where that seam runs into it, that's the exact point that you want to hit, because that's the weakest part of the bottle in the glass.
Exactly. And it also gives you a really nice kind of runway. And then you just kind of slide the saber along the side of the bottle, or honestly, the back of a heavy kitchen knife works really well. And typically what I'll use when I don't have my saber handy, but you hit this saber or knife along the seam of the bottle where you're not slicing, but where you're running the edge of your knife against.
When I first saw sabering, I always thought that this long sword or saber was slicing or cutting the glass. That's why you need that sharp edge. But to your point, you could use the back, and it's actually ideal if you use the back of a chef's knife. If you're not using the sharp edge, you're hitting the saber at that weak point we described, and you're breaking the top of the bottle off. There's that lip, kind of looks like almost like a glass ring on the top. What you're doing is you're actually snapping that off the top of the bottle.
Exactly. You can actually do it to where you only hit the cork off. So, and again, this is a bottle under pressure, and there are so many different variables here. I have been able to actually just pop the cork. But to your point, most of the time, what you're going to see is glass cleanly breaking off. That's why you're hitting the weakest part of the bottle. There's so much pressure. And once you just kind of lightly, and it's not a forceful hit either. It's more about precision than it is about force. And if you hit it at the exact right place, it'll slice off very cleanly. So sometimes it'll be just the cork, and sometimes you'll actually break the bottle. And be careful for any shards of glass.
And because it sort of naturally shoots out the wine, it sort of flushes. any cork or glass bits that could potentially be in there. But although it's usually a very clean pop.
Yeah.
I do have a fun fact here. According to the Guinness World Record, what is the most number of bottles sabered in 1 minute in a competitive sabering scene? So imagine like they're literally, this is like the hot dog eating contest. And she, the person holding this record, is sabering like crazy.
Okay, I'm going to say the fastest you could do is 1 per second. So I'm going to say 60 bottles.
It's pretty good. It was actually 47. I think there's a little more time in the turnover between bottling.
True. If someone was handing them to her, she probably could have done it in 60.
Exactly. Also, it's worth noting that Cava is made under higher pressure. It doesn't work with Proseccos and Pet Nats. The glass is thinner. The bubbles are lighter. In general, it's just not safe because there isn't enough pressure to do a sabering opening.
That's a really good point. So the pressure inside of a bottle of Cava is about 5 to 6 atmospheres, which is roughly 3 times the pressure in a car tire. So proceed with caution. Only do this with Cava and champagne because you know that it's under this extreme amount of pressure, where other frizzante or sparkling wines are just not under the same kind of pressure. We have a Cava that we've actually worked with for a very long time.
They were part of our very first collection almost 5 years ago.
It's one of our favorite sparkling wines. It's fabulous on a budget, and you would never know it because of the way it drinks. And it is like the champagne of Spain. The producer is Alta, Alella, and they have a very long tradition of farming organically. And it's this really beautiful generations-old family winemaker. They make both still and sparkling wines. We're absolutely in love with their Cava. So definitely give it a try.
They're an organic farm, and all of their Cavas are sulfite-free. And so they're as natural as it gets when it comes to Cava.
It's worth a try if you want to try sabering and you need some good bubbly on hand. Now, those are all traditions for pouring and serving.
Yes. I mean, we can't talk about Spain without talking about some of their festivals, and most notably one that happens in Rioja. So Rioja is known for their red wines. Their wines are made from the Tempranillo grape. So one that just happened last week, it happens every June 29th. It's called La Batalla del Vino, aka the Battle of Wine. And everyone gathers in a town called Haro. The history behind this, it dates back to the 13th century. It was a boundary dispute between the town of Haro and their neighboring town. And the locals had to climb this cliff and place their flag at the top of this to claim this border. And it eventually turned into more of a pilgrimage. And then in modern day in celebration, it has now turned into what we're calling a wine battle or a wine fight. So on the day of the festival, people dress from head to toe in white, and then they will wear a red scarf, like as an accent. Everyone has brought red wine in whatever vessel they've decided, bowls, pitchers, bottles, etc. And as soon as the battle begins, people just start throwing red wine all over each other. They're laughing, there's dancing. And of course, since everybody's wearing white, everyone ends up in this sort of deep purple, not just their clothes, but their skin, and their hands are covered in wine. And there's music, and everyone's, yelling and laughing. And it's just this big tradition that they call the Battle of the Wine. And it happens every year at the end of June. The idea is that they're simulating an old tradition of battling for the boundary.
This reminds me of Holi in India, and that tradition of throwing spices at people.
And they also dress in all white.
Yeah, and you come out with these really beautiful, rich colors.
Yeah, the Festival of Colors. Holi is really colorful, and I think it has a very similar vibe. So whether it's their colored spices or their vessels of red wine, and they all gather and wait for that moment for everything to start. And then it's just full on chaos, wine flying everywhere, and people laughing and getting totally drenched.
So is there a winner?
Everyone's a winner.
I don't know. Are we all losing? Are we all winning?
Everyone's a winner. And then there's like a big communal feast. So they serve a lot of lamb chops, a lot of local cuisine. And so after the battle, as everyone is just, not really even drying out, just really drenched. Everyone sort of like slops over to the food area where all of the restaurants locally have brought in their different cuisines. And there's like a communal feast where everyone obviously not only just feasts, but probably they're reminiscing some of the best parts of this battle. So,
well, that's super fun. And also no pressure if you spill any wine on yourself during this feast. That's okay.
Yeah, it's actually as opposite from the other wine traditions we were talking about, where everything's about prestige and precision.
Right.
This one is like entry level. You can't mess up. Okay. But not every wine festival is loud and messy. There are some that are very intensely almost meditative, and that's where Copa Jerez comes in. So we talked about sherry. Copa Jerez is in Andalusia, where you're right in the heart of sherry country. But it's not just a wine competition. It is a wine and food pairing competition. And the format is that you have a chef and a sommelier teamed up to create a 3-course meal, and each course has to pair with a different style of sherry. So we talked about how you can get PX, which is Pedro Jimenez, which is a super sweet, almost syrupy, like dessert version of sherry, all the way to the more popular style, which is Fino. And Fino is bone dry, crisp, light, and aromatic. Kind of like a dry martini, but with wine. That's like the Fino style. And then you get everything in between. You get Amontillado, which famous because of Edgar Allan Poe. But also it's like a nuttier, richer flavor of sherry that is also dry. So you get all these different styles, and you have Michelin star chefs and very famous sommeliers teaming up to create this menu. And they're scored on the technical execution of the meal, the emotional connection they make between the wine and the food in each course. And then they're also scored on the story they tell across all 3 courses. And it takes place every 2 years. The judging panel from Michelin starred chefs, top sommeliers, sherry experts, of course. There are people who specialize in sherry. And it's just the finals that happen in Spain. It's just the finals, which also happened last month on June 2nd and June 3rd. This actually starts months prior. It's a global tour. And so they host qualifiers around the world. In the second half of 2024, they went around to different countries. And the prize there was that they got an all-expense-paid trip to Andalusia for the final round. There were 8 teams. So it was Mexico, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, the US, the UK, Germany, and of course, Spain. All sent in their teamed up sommelier and chef duo. And they had won locally in their respective regional competitions.
Who won?
Denmark won. I know. Denmark won this past month. Do you want to hear the menu? Because it's going to make you really hungry. Okay, so the starter that they presented was a fried mackerel with sherry vinegar with sun-dried tomatoes, crispy sage, lobster butter, and they paired it with a palo cortado style sherry. The second course was a pork belly confit with sweet and sour barbecue sauce. There was a hazelnut duca, stuffed black pudding, and they paired it with an oloroso sherry.
So like a nuttier, darker style.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then for dessert, they did a fermented dough with cinnamon, kumquat confit, orange blossom, and a salted caramel ice cream with a pour over of cardamom syrup. And they paired it with a cream sherry.
Oh my gosh.
So, what's cool about this competition is it really highlights how dynamic sherry is. Like, it's not just some dusty after dinner drink that you sip after your meal. It's not just a dessert wine. But it really kind of runs the spectrum, so much so that they have this, very iconic competition. Another part of this competition is that it's not super chaotic. And then at the very end of the competition, it's like full on Iron Chef Kitchen Stadium judging moment. Yeah. Right? You've got the pair being judged, and they just sit there and watch the judges eat each course as it's like being served.
And they have to tell their story of it and all the ingredients, how it unfolds. Yeah.
It's really cool. There's no crowd and there's no band. Nobody's boozing away in the corners, but it's like a quiet, tense. So anyway.
Oh my gosh.
That's a fun one.
Well, and it's so beautiful too, because often we think of sherry as this like, I don't know, like cupboard wine that is just like kind of cheap and used for cooking. And I don't know, it's like salty and sweet. And it's just this like, like cupboard ingredient that you would just like throw in a dish. But it's so versatile. There's so many different styles. And it's important to really experiment with the drinking sherries and how you pair it, not only to put it in a dish, but also to enjoy alongside of it. And also interesting to know, sherry is a fortified wine. It's not made the way a traditional wine is made. It's in the same category as like a port. So what happens is you pick the grapes, you smash the grapes. The grapes are fermenting with yeast as you would a traditional wine. But at some point, the fermentation is stopped by a neutral spirit. So typically like clear, high ABV alcohol, like a brandy or something. And what that does is that ups the alcohol, obviously, of the final wine, but it stops fermentation. And so strategically, that's how they create sweeter styles. And then, of course, sherry in a class of its own is made by this whole intricate process of blending different batches and different years and all this. So it's an incredible art. Now that you're salivating about sherry and you're dying to try it and create your own competition at home, we have a really beautiful dry sherry. It's a Fino sherry called Innocente, and it's from this producer called Valdespino.
Yeah, it's good for drinking and cooking. Mm-hmm. And Valdespino is one of the oldest and most prestigious sherry houses in Jerez, Spain. They trace back to the 13th century, and they were at one point in the 19th century the official supplier to both the Spanish and Swedish royalties. And so they have some real deep roots, and they also make phenomenal sherry.
Yeah, this is not their first rodeo. And it's a really nice starter sherry because it's really clean, it's bright, it's lighter in style. It can be served as a cocktail over ice. If you are a mixologist, it's a great sherry ingredient in your mixed drink. And it's also a wonderful addition to a whole host of recipes. I love serving it on ice with just some olives and salty nuts, some pan con tomate, some charcuterie, cheeses. It kind of goes with everything. It's really beautiful.
So this episode was all about fun wine traditions that turns a simple wine pour into something that's social, intentional, sometimes dramatic. We talked about wine celebrations and competitions, but we would be remiss if we did not include our wine facts to close out this segment. So, Christine, you want to go first?
Mine is Spain related. The oldest known wine cellars in Spain are actually underground caves. So in the region of Castilla y León, which is where the Ribera del Duero wine region is located, there's an entire network of underground wine cellars that date back to the 12th century. These ancient caves, sometimes located right beneath people's homes, were hand carved into limestone and have the perfect natural conditions for aging wine. They're cool, stable temperatures and high humidity. What's even more amazing is that many of these underground tunnels connect to each other like a secret labyrinth under the city streets. It's pretty amazing. And locals still gather in these underground bodegas to share wine and food directly from the barrels. And these gatherings are called merenderos. And essentially they're wine picnics, but held underground.
Oh, fun. It's like a speakeasy or something under the city.
Yes, it's an underground cave speakeasy. So when in the region and exploring Spain, if you ever go to the Ribera del Duero, you got to check out these caves. Okay, so what's your fact for the day?
We're going to stay on topic here.
We're staying in Spain.
We're staying in Spain. Spain as a country is actually very, very large in real estate. It actually has most amount of land dedicated to vineyards than any other country in the world.
In the world?
In the world. Over 1 million hectares. Because of that, it is also has the most hectares of organic farming compared to any other country in the world. However, it is not the number one wine producer in terms of volume. So despite having the largest amount of acreage and coverage, they don't grow wine as densely as places like France or Italy, where Italy and France as a powerhouse, so to speak, produce more wine in volume, but they have less land dedicated to it because they just tend to grow their wines very differently in terms of vine spacing.
That's so interesting. So actually, it reminds me, I was in the Ribera del Duero region, and this was easily, I don't know, almost 20 years ago. And I remember we met this winemaker, and he showed us his whole production. It was incredible. And he was this like older man, but he was full of life and energy and just excited to show us around. He made this absolutely incredible Tempranillo wines. And then at the end of it, he took us out to what he was most excited about. And it was this huge kind of back hillside, this massive vineyard that he had just planted within the last 5 years. And he said he was so excited about it for all these various reasons. He just thought it was going to, this vineyard was going to create his most spectacular wines yet. Then at the end of this whole description of the vineyard, he told us that the first wines out of this vineyard were going to be from his grandchildren's children.
Wow. That is some future thinking.
Right? So this is his life's work. He's so excited about it. He gets up every single morning to go and work on this land and work with these vines. And he just can't wait for his grandchildren's children to make the first wines.
Wow.
That makes total sense in that they're not planting and producing and making wines just with any sort of industrial high volume
mindset.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm sure there is a lot of industrial production in Spain, certainly, but that tracks, that makes sense, and that they are not the highest producing country, because that mindset is just mind blowing. And it's so different from how we think here in the US and in many Western countries. And I just thought that was the most romantic, most beautiful thing that I'd ever heard. And still to this day is about wine. I'll never forget that moment.
Wow. Another thing that I think lends into this is field blends. This is something that's very popular in Spain, especially, is that a lot of these vines are left sort of untouched for centuries. You think of Napa or sometimes in Bordeaux, these like neat rows of vines that have, this is the row of Cab, this is the row of Merlot, etc. But in some of these southern parts of Spain, they have what are known as field blends, where parcels of lands have grapevines kind of growing wildly. So both red and white grapes are growing together, and they're farmed together and blended together, and they're known sort of as field blends. Then they may not be optimally spaced to maximize the number of vines and grapes in that parcel of land.
It is so romantic too, because these field blends and the way that grapes grow, there's a lot of mutations that happen in that process. When the rows and the vines are so carefully curated, they can keep them apart, if you will, so much so that they maintain their genetic integrity. Yeah. But when they grow together and it's this wild field of vines, after, generations and generations and centuries, they start genetically mutating.
Mutations and crossbreeds, I think, right? Like they're basically crossbreeding a lot of these.
Yeah, exactly. Crossbreeding and mutations. Not only are they different grape varieties, red, white, whatever, they're also mostly genetic mutations that only exist there. And the Spanish are okay with that. They see the beauty in that and the kind of singularity of a place. And when you taste the wines in some of these field blends, they really do. I mean, it's, naturally they don't taste like anything else, and it's gorgeous. That's a tradition in Spain, in Portugal, and some parts of Italy as well. But Spain and Portugal, you'll see a lot of field blends. Spain has such a rich history of wine making, wine drinking, and it really is still vibrant today. And there's purpose behind them, whether it's hygienic or protecting the wine itself, but they keep them alive today, and it certainly adds flair to the experience.
And so I think we'll wrap up this episode here.
Yeah. All right. So here's our awkward goodbye. See you next time.
Bye. Thanks.